While Europe continues to argue about Russian drones crossing NATO borders, Ukraine is quietly laying out its own mechanics of pressure on Russia deep behind enemy lines. Today, two major stories have emerged at once. The first is about explosions in the Artem area near Vladivostok in the Far East, which were reported by the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence in the southeast of Russia. This is the second incident. A strike on the Saratov oil refinery. Fires broke out. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine has confirmed the fact, though details are still being clarified. And this is not just geography from Vladivostok to the Volga region. These are two different logics. Operations by the Ukrainian special services in a zone that Moscow considered unreachable, and a systematic oil pressure effect on the export and budget of the Russian Federation. Let's add here the source's assessment that the series of attacks is already forcing Russian oil to slow down, and international traders have almost completely removed Russian barrels of oil for dollars. And as a result, we get a picture of strategic exhaustion that Kyiv is building brick by brick, and it's more effective than any Western sanctions. That's why in this episode, we'll discuss this topic in depth. Not just the two episodes of attacks by Ukraine's defense forces on Russian territory, but how this has a comprehensive impact on the Kremlin's economy and military machine. My name is Alexei Pechi, and before we begin, I want to remind you that this YouTube channel releases several news stories every day so that you can stay up to date with all the news. That's why I recommend subscribing to this channel and ask you to like this episode. So let's get to the facts. First, Primorye. Ukrainian intelligence officially reported explosions near Vladivostok without revealing details about the perpetrators or the target, but provided a photo of a giant crater and noted that this was the result of the actions of the Ukrainian defense forces, not just some random bang. The location is the Artem area, a couple dozen kilometers from Vladivostok. And for people who aren't familiar with the Far East, this is a key transportation hub. It's a gateway for military forces, for cargo to the Pacific Fleet, and to the airfield network of the Russian army. So this is a very important military area where the Russians hid their forces when the range of the Ukrainian armed forces on Russian territory started to expand. The main intelligence directorate of Ukraine's defense ministry issued a brief but significant statement. The operation's details will be shared after completion, hinting that more is yet to come. And here is this important phrase. Because such episodes often come in a series, like it was with Operation Potina, or a series of strikes on Russia's oil refineries. Now we move to episode 2, Saratov. Officially, that's the name. On the night of September, 16 units of the Special Operations Forces, in coordination with other branches of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, struck the Saratov oil refinery. Explosions and fires occurred near the facility, with the results under clarification, according to Ukraine's General Staff. Well, as you understand, an oil refinery is not some random target. It's the lifeblood of Russian logistics and export revenues. Plus, it's a base for military fuel, and here every disruption means a decrease in the volume of oil products. These are changes in the supply schemes of the Western Military District of the Russian Federation and disruptions in the schedules for shipping oil products. In short, the armed forces of Ukraine are actively continuing to impose sanctions against the Russian Federation. Well, while our partners are still thinking. And the third point is the systemic background. A series of drone attacks on oil production and refining facilities may force Russia to cut production simply to avoid pouring oil into the bottlenecks of processing and logistics. These are not just my words, this is a quote from experts cited by Bloomberg. At the same time, Bloomberg writes that Russia has been almost completely cut out from the global oil trade in dollars. It's not the physical oil trade itself that's being blocked, but specifically the dollar settlements and the services around them. Insurance, clearing, and major banks. This leads to more barter schemes, yuan, rupees, grey insurers, and costly logistics, all resulting in negative cash flow for the budget and defense industry. Now let's dive into the analysis. Let's start with the main intelligence directorate attack in Vladivostok. This is a demonstration of the reach of the armed forces of Ukraine. It doesn't matter whether it was a planted charge or a long-range drone, or was it the work of local collaborators. What matters is that this holy zone of the Pacific Fleet's rear in Russia no longer looks untouchable. The psychological effect on the Russian audience is enormous. The war has come to a place where Russians considered themselves mere spectators. About the same. After such incidents, security forces will limit access to warehouses, training grounds, and communication platforms. This means a slowdown of all processes, more inspections, and less flexibility. And the main intelligence directorate, judging by the style of the message, is deliberately keeping these details of the operation under wraps, so as not to, as they say, burn the methods and people involved in this operation. But the main point here is actually different. The front has long not been limited to just a line of contact. And Ukraine has the tools to keep up the pressure in regions that are used to sleeping peacefully. Now, about Saratov. Strikes on oil refineries are basically Ukraine's economic artillery. This isn't just for headlines like blowing up some oil pipeline. No, this is about prolonged pain. Let me explain what I mean. Any shutdown, any fire, any breach in the tanks means weeks of repairs, a halt in processing, and the need to transfer raw materials to other sites. This means new supply chains, discounts, and risks for insurance companies. Russia has few protection options. But not all oil refineries can be covered with air defense systems, especially those deep inside the country. And drones and sabotage groups are learning to bypass any familiar locations altogether. Meanwhile, fuel logistics tensions are increasing. The civilian market pressures prices, the front pressures quantity, and this is ongoing long term. This doesn't instantly destroy Moscow's war machine, but it makes it costlier and more cash intensive. This is where everything aligns with what industry sources are currently discussing. If oil refining is running at a loss, it's easier to reduce oil production itself than to fill up storage facilities and just keep circulating that excess oil in closed loops. That's because they are currently taking leftover oil from the Saratov refinery and trying to transfer it to another refinery. While they're transferring it, something could also happen to the refinery. They need to dispose of this oil again. It's a vicious cycle. And now let's remember the almost complete exit of Russian oil from dollar trading. The restructuring of settlements in yuan and rupees. Major Chinese banks' self-imposed sanctions against Russians combined with costly maritime insurance add up. Each barrel of oil brings fewer real dollars to the Russian budget. At this point, strikes on oil refineries aren't just about burning things. It's about cutting off the income and cash that are converted into missiles and drones. You know, it's like turning a valve, but not on a pipeline, on the budget of the Russian Federation. There's also an informational aspect to this story. Moscow traditionally calls these terrorist attacks, while Kyiv considers them a legitimate target in the aggressor's military economy. On foreign markets, to be honest, the third thing is more important. These are the risks of supply and insurance. If the tanker market sees that another oil refinery is burning again in Russia, premiums start to rise, the discounts on Urals oil are forced to widen, and the Russian budget feels the pain again already at the sales stage. Here, Ukraine, with the help of several dozen drones and targeted groups, is doing what sanctions usually did over years. They are changing the trade coefficients. And finally, the range in Primorye shows that the Russians don't have any distant rear areas. This is a serious headache for the Russian army. Keeping the West, the South, and the Far East on high alert is expensive and difficult. The more hotspots there are, the more holes there are in the container. And this is exactly the case where asymmetry works. Unfortunately, Ukraine cannot compete in terms of the volume of artillery fire, for example, nor can it compete in terms of manpower. But it can put the opponent in checkmate when it comes to logistics, economy, and psychology. Conclusion. The two strikes on September 16 are two messages. Vladivostok, we can reach you, we can reach anywhere. Saratov will hit you in your wallet. And if you combine this with the trend of squeezing Russian barrels out of the dollar ecosystem, you get a strategy not of an instant knockout but of attrition. This is a strategy of attrition. In this strategy, every crater near Vladivostok and every fire at a refinery in Russia, it's not just a picture. These are percentages in the formula. Less cash, fewer missiles. Well, that means this economic artillery will only keep increasing. And this artillery works better than any Western sanctions. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's it for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.